getting double the work experience, and also kind of in hopes to be able to expand the team and fund this myself, because I've always been pretty clear from like a young age that, even though I may come from like a privileged background, I didn't want to, I wanted to do this on my own, right?
Welcome to the latest episode of What's Next with Gaurav and Ronit, discussing the frontier of finance, tech, and everything else. With that introduction, let's go to the young man himself. Thank you so much for joining us. So tell us about your company. So it's called Dimension, right?
Yes. I'm building Dimension, and we're building a collaboration platform for modern engineering teams. And of course, there's a short story and there's a long story on what inspired me to build Dimension. But the short story, yeah. So the short story is that modern teams use a lot of different tools to build and deploy software, and these tools are not unified or connected in any way. And so developers find themselves context switching between all these different platforms several times a day to find the information they need to build and deploy software, right? And so we thought that developers and engineering teams should spend more time building stuff rather than doing administration tasks and constantly switching between these different platforms. And so we thought, what if we unify all these different tools into a single platform for engineering teams to make sure that developers can focus on building and not other stuff, right? And so that inspired me to build Dimension. And of course, there's also a long story on, my journey and what really inspired me to build it. But yeah, of course, I'm happy to dive into that.
We want to hear the long story, my friend. Let's get into the long story as well. Let's start at the start. Where are we? What's the dateline? Where
Sure.
are we? What time? Are we
Yeah.
in Dubai? Are we in India? Are we in the US? Where are we?
So we're back in Bangalore in India.
Bangalore.
It's the beginning of the lockdown. My dad and I were on our evening walks, and typically we discuss, a lot of really cool ideas that could be built out and implemented into like an app, right? Unlike a lot of other nights where I just go back and I feel helpless that, okay, this is a really cool idea, but I don't know how to code. What can I do, right? So that night I decided that I just wanted to do something, right? It didn't matter if it was the most successful app on the planet. It didn't matter if it was just a tiny thing that a couple of people in the community adopted. I wanted to learn how to make these really cool ideas into actual apps, right? And so I hopped on. I remember this really well. So I ran down the stairs with a Udemy course kind of loaded on my laptop. I asked my parents to buy it for me. It was pretty cheap at that point in time. I think it was like 400 rupees. So it was almost a no-brainer. And it was a course for iOS app development. I always wanted to do something on mobile because I personally felt like it was the platform, and of course it's even more used than desktop and other platforms, right? So mobile was the easiest way to start getting into making a real impact. And so I bought a course on Udemy, and that night I probably slept really, really late because I was just hooked on to the fact that I could just write a few lines of code and boom, there's an app that you can put in people's hands, right? And I felt like I had a surreal amount of power and freedom with just writing a few lines of code and shipping it onto someone's phone, and for them to be able to use it like all the apps that I'd been using throughout the day. And so that was what really clicked. And until then, I wouldn't say I really found a passion for something. I wasn't like really, really strongly passionate about many things at that point in time, but software programming and coding, it was something that struck me as, hey, this is something that is real. I can build anything I can imagine, and I'm only constrained by time, right? And so, I started going through the course for like 8-9 hours every single day, and I was hooked on. And of course, then school started, and so by the time I'd convinced my parents to give me 2 displays, because on one display I would have my Udemy course, and on the other display I would have my code editor. And it was really kind of annoying to context switch between these two tabs all the time. And so I said, hey, can I please just get two monitors? And little did they know that would be the worst decision for me academically, because during classes and online school, which was not engaging in any way, in any shape or form, I was on my second monitor coding, right? So of course, that in hindsight, it wasn't the best decision for my scores at the end of the year. But of course, it was what kind of really intrigued me. And at that point in time, I was pretty sure that I wanted to do software engineering for a pretty long time. And so I built that app out in kind of a pretty hacky way. I wouldn't say it's a production app in any shape or form, but it was something and it was functional. And I then thought that, hey, a lot of people in the community are using Android phones as well. So I have to build for India's biggest market, right? Because India, unfortunately, only has a minority of iOS users in the market. So I wanted a way to be able to build an app and ship it off on multiple different platforms, be it iOS or Android. And so I then started learning Flutter, which actually enabled me to do that in app development. And so, of course, I went through a similar progression journey to a lot of other engineers. Exploring a lot of different technologies, be it Python, Rust, Go, etc. Just exploring all these languages and technologies. And, at one point in time, I got my first internship at a company, at an AI company called Mad Street Den. And I did some really fun stuff with Python over there. And, of course, from then on, I was building a lot of open source stuff. I was working at all these different companies, getting a really, really good idea of what actual production engineering teams work like and what tools they use and what the environment is. And, at one point in time, I realized that, this problem of fragmentation of tooling, where teams use so many different tools and there is no unification layer, there is no integration between these tools. I realized, as I spoke to, the founders of these companies I worked at, I realized this was a significant problem. And I kind of, at that point in time, my earliest dream project was to build a Discord for programmers, right? So I was very engaged on Discord. And in fact, I also run a community of more than 5,000 young people building and deploying amazing products. It's called Build a Group, and it's run as a Discord community. So I actually noticed increasingly that younger builders and developers are using platforms like Discord for engineering stuff instead of Slack, right? And so I wanted to zoom in into why that's happening, right? Because I was also doing it myself and I had my own reasons, but there can be different reasons from different people. And so I ran a survey in Build a Group, and we had this one question, which was, why do you enjoy using a tool like Discord more than Slack, if you do, right? And so there was actually two questions. The first question was, do you use Discord or Slack? And the second question was, if so, why do you enjoy using this platform over the other? And every single response was, we use Discord. And in terms of kind of why, the answer was just that it's more fun and collaborative, right? I don't feel like I'm doing work, right? Of course, Gen Z has this connotation of work as being something that's boring and negative, which it doesn't have to be, right? And so, instead of, Slack's code, which is where work happens, Dimension was, and this is, again, I think this is encapsulated to some extent in Discord for developers, because Discord fundamentally is a platform that people find to be something that's fun to use, right? So, Discord for developers, and that, of course, combined with this understanding of how modern teams work and the fact that people use all these different tools and there's a lack of integration, basically drove me to say, hey, now's the time. I didn't have any funding at the time. I wasn't even a web developer. So I started working 2 internships at the same time to pay interns on the team. And so, of course, I was really, really excited about what could be made of Dimension at that point in time. And so that kind of, that gave birth to the platform.
So Dimension coming together, so you kind of given us the narrative of like going for walks with your dad, and some inspirational stuff was happening then, and I think all fathers or wannabe fathers need to find out exactly what your dad was doing right. So that's maybe a conversation of another time. Maybe we need your dad on to talk about, because that's obviously an inspiring story. But during lockdown, you start coding, and is that the first time you're doing actually hands-on coding, or were you doing this before already?
Oh, so I actually, my parents tried to get me into coding through classes before, but I also learned that when you give me I mean like when you put me in a class to learn something, I don't really actually end up enjoying it and seeing its true merit, because the way I internally associate it is it's a class. So the class is done, time for that is done,
Uh,
move on to other stuff. And
yeah,
so I wasn't really able to enjoy coding when they initially introduced it to me.
uh,
And I think, of course, to some extent, that was because of the form of how it was introduced to me. But
yeah,
I tried before, and I roughly kind of like when I started, I had some fundamentals on variables and loops and stuff like that. But I was almost starting from ground zero, and I never thought that programming was something that would be such a significant part of my journey, kind
mm.
of after that one day in the lockdown.
So it like some good things came out of lockdown, and for you, it was you discovered properly hands-on coding, and then you discover this need, what becomes Dimension. So this idea of having a company or a whatever you want to call it, a venture called Dimension, when does that really start coming together? And you mentioned lockdown and school and dad and mom and without embarrassing you, I mean, you're a Zoomer. And it's amazing what you built already, but if you don't mind sharing with the audience, how old were you when you were like building this idea of having a company?
Sure. So I'd say I was definitely, leaning towards building a company. So of course there are different definitions to a company, right? Because a
Sure.
company at that point in time when I was 15, right? Like when I
Yeah.
was just almost turning actually kind of mid 15, I would say. So when I was around 15 and a half, I started thinking about Dimension as, more than just a project, like just a fun project. I started thinking of this as, hey, I want to shoot for the stars. I want to get real customers.
Yeah.
I want to make real revenue. And of course, those are
Yeah.
long-term objectives. But I started thinking about it in a more
Mm.
serious way when I was around 15 and a half, right? And then when I was 16, so actually kind of between 15 and a half until I turned 16, that was
Mm.
when it really solidified in me that, hey, I don't want to just build a company. I want to build a company, like a company, right? So like an actual company. And so, I mean, this is during, I mean, I was probably in like a bunch of fundraising calls on my birthday on May 26th last year. And
Hang on, that was your 16th or 17th
yes,
birthday.
my 16th birthday. So
You're on fundraising calls with proper VCs on your 16th birthday.
yes, yes, yes.
How does that happen?
Sure. So I asked my dad, I told my dad, hey, I want to raise
Yeah.
capital.
Yeah.
I can't work two internships for the rest of my life to fund a bunch of interns. So my first one, a pretty substantial amount of time before was Matt Street then. But I was also working. So I was actually paid time contract at this, part-time contract at this company called Two Desktop, which is a YC company. And then I was also working at this company called Lambda Test at the time. So I was working with these two companies at the same time, internships, getting double the work experience, and also kind of in hopes to be able to expand the team and fund this myself, because I've always been pretty clear from like a young age that even though I may come from like a privileged background, I didn't want to I wanted to do this on my own, right?
Okay, so you're doing funding calls, and these are with what VCs in the US?
Yes. Yeah, VCs in India. So what
In
actually happened
India.
was that, so there's this amazing person. His name is Sayan Ghosh. He used to invest at IFC. He was a funds of funds investor. So
Right.
he reached out to me on Twitter, saying that, hey, I like what you're doing.
Oh,
Let's hop on a call and let's talk, right? And of
yeah.
course, being a funds of funds investor, there is
Yeah,
no one better you will find better connected with venture
absolutely.
capital funds.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and so basically, I had my first call with him, and to be frank with you, it wasn't the best call. I mean, my pitch at that time
Why do
was
you say that? What
sorry.
happened on the call? Well, why do you say it wasn't your best call? What happened?
Because so I mean, there's multiple reasons, and as a founder, some
Yeah.
calls go well because the people you talk to, like there's a certain aura, and if they're, and like even though like they can be super encouraging, but also I don't know, there's this factor in
Mhm.
multiple calls. I don't know what it is, and it's been a mystery to me. But
Mm.
there's something about some people that it just doesn't make you pitch as well, right? And that's
Okay.
not to say that those people are wrong or anything as
Sure,
such. It's
sure.
just something I've noticed, which is for some pitches just don't go as well. And the funny thing was that of course it was also a bit of a challenge to get across what we were building, because Sayan was not a deeply technical person at that point in time as well. So it also makes it a bit harder to explain the product. But
Mm.
I have to give him massive credit for believing in me after that pitch, and offering to help me through kind of after that, because of course he then opened a lot of doors for me. He kept introing me to a bunch of family funds and angels and VCs, and eventually I was introduced to Antler, and that was the one that finally ended up clicking. But I have to, I mean, I'm so grateful to him for believing in me. After of course, it's pretty hard to have this level of conviction
Mm.
in someone who was 16 at the time, whose pitch was okay, and whose product you couldn't fully understand because you weren't technical, and it's obviously not your fault, right? And so of course there are some people who have put in a lot of faith in me, and I think that's also a really big part of why I'm here today, is because a lot of people have believed in me. And so actually, of course, I spoke to my dad. I told him I want to raise capital. I want to raise venture capital, and he was like, this basically never happens in India, and you're probably never going to get a check. But it's a great
What did
learning
that
experience.
say? When was that?
So that was probably April last year.
He said, "Why are you doing this, son? Just focus on your studies and coding
Yeah,
yourself
yeah. He just
in."
wanted me to focus on my studies.
Just
And
like, can you just get into MIT and just get rid of all this,
yeah,
whatever?
then build your
Yeah,
company,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I was arrogant at the time, and I surely there's someone out there who would of course believe in what I was doing, right? And so I was pitching. I probably talked to like hundreds of VC funds at that point in time.
This is
Uh,
last, this is last year.
Yes, yes, last year. That was for our pre-seed round. So
Yeah.
I'd probably spoken to hundreds of angels, hundreds of funds, and it always felt like I was this close to getting a check, but it didn't happen, right? And so at one point in time, towards end of July, I was starting to think that, hey, maybe my dad's right, maybe it's not possible, right? Um, and so that night I decided, hey, let me just go crazy with cold outreach. So
Yeah.
someone shared a link to this group called DevTools Angels, and that's run by this investor. His name is Sean Wong. And he is really, really well connected in San Francisco to the entire tech community, right? And so he basically runs this kind of this group of angels. And so I created a cold message. I copy pasted it to every single investor that I could find on the list on Twitter. And of course, 90% of them didn't end up working out. But Sean himself said, "Hey, I'm interested. Tell me more about what you're building," right? And so I eventually qualified for a call with him. And at the end of the call, he mentioned, I think the co-founder of GitHub would really like to know more about what you're doing. And I was pretty startled, because I never imagined that someone like kind of that I would be even getting the chance to talk to someone like Tom Preston Werner at that point in time, who is of course he's a multi-billionaire. He sold GitHub for $7 billion, and he is one of the most successful investors out there. And so it was surreal. I felt like, I felt like it shouldn't have been possible. But, of course, he introduced me, and Tom agreed to take the introduction. And, a month later, I was on a call with Tom, right? And so that was surreal. And, I pitched to him, and he said he wanted to have a follow-up call. And on the second call, he told me towards the end that he said you're really early. And, I still think there's a lot of stuff you have to figure out. But he mentioned that he liked my clarity in the space, and he mentioned that he liked my insight, and so he said I'd like to invest 50K, and so that was I just wanted to scream out loud at that point in time.
I want to bring Gaurav into the conversation.
Thanks, Ronit. I mean, first of all, I just have to say, super cool. I think super cool is the way I would describe everything you've just talked about so far. It's wow. So I mean, hats off to you on that, but I am biased. So what I want to do is exactly as Ronit said, I want to put a magnification on the next part of your journey, right? Which is what everyone will obviously want to know and is going to be super curious about, because you haven't had a job before, right? And again, like Ronit has said before, this is not to undermine, this is not to diminish, this is not to say anything. This is just to highlight the fact and contextualize your approach, right? For people who may be listening as well and want to be, curious and perhaps understand your journey so that they can perhaps benefit from it in some way, or perhaps fast track their own way, or take that leap of faith. They're on the edge of wanting to start their own company. So, this is just it goes to show it doesn't matter how old you are, you can do this, right? And if you have the right persistence, the right angle, the right approach. So what I want to do is talk about this building of the company. Where do you start? Because, do I build a Delaware company? Do I set up an offshore? Do I everything else? In your space, you're not building anything with hardware, so you don't need physical location. In the second space, the advantage you have is you're building a remote capable tool set itself. So it should be a good experience for people working to build it. Technically should be using Dimension to build Dimension in a kind of way, which is kind of like, oh my God, how far down the rabbit hole do we go? This is going to be cool. So I guess in a way, it sort of answers itself. But at the same time, it doesn't. And I don't want to take that for granted. So let's walk through it, right? Where did you start? What was the approach? Okay, I'm the CEO, I'm the founder. Who's the co-founder, right? Because when you're looking at investors, they always say solo founders are a tough one. There are exceptions. So where are you on that, the team building? So talk about how you built the team from yourself onwards. Let's start with the team.
Absolutely. Yes. So at that point in time, actually, I did have a co-founder. So I had a co-founder. His name was Varun. He's an extremely talented young kid. And at that point in time, he was like 15 at the time, which is even more impressive. And so he was technically a genius. And it was going really, really well with him. And then unfortunately, in December, he comes and says that, hey, I'm not able to commit the time that Dimension needs. And of course, this is something that I'd brought up with him previously, right? Because how it was, and by the way, just for some context, he was really passionate about the company, and it was unfortunately not his decision. But essentially, he was working on kind of with the Indian school system, right? And the Indian school system is CBSE, and CBSE, having done a few years in CBSE, is an extremely large amount of work. And he was, of course, his parents also wanted him to shoot for JEE and IIT and the best universities in India, which I, of course, can't fault them for, right? And so, even after kind of receiving backing from some amazing investors, Varun, unfortunately he had tests every 2 months. And so he was gone for 2 weeks every 2 months, right? And so unfortunately, it was really hard. And, once we had actual investors, we had timelines to commit to. I was accountable, right? And, I couldn't just say that, hey, I'm sorry, my co-founder is writing exams right now. I'll get back to you once he's back, right? So So Warren was a genius, but unfortunately, we had to have that tough conversation of, hey, is the company going to be something that you would be able to seriously commit to over the following years, because your time commitment to school, especially if you're trying for JEE and scoring the highest grades, is only going to increase through ninth, 10th, 11th, and 12th, right? And so, unfortunately, Varun decided that hey, he would. I mean, he couldn't really continue to commit the amount of time that was required for Dimension over the following years, right? And and so at that point in time, I was uh I was basically broken because I've lost my co-founder, right? Fortunately for me, my investors were still on board, which of course I am very grateful for. But I'm not a web developer and I have no technical experience in building web platforms, right? I do infrastructure stuff, I do systems engineering stuff, but I do not do web development, right? And I could learn web development, but that would take a lot of time, right? And so I was in the situation of, okay, so there's no team today, there's no co-founder, it's just me. I'm not a technical person in this specific field of software engineering. So how do I build out this company that is just so heavy on this, right? And so at that point in time, my it started off with my dad sharing this link to a website called lemon.io, and I think that's this kind of and I've noticed. So basically, there are these development agencies that help you source engineers from around the world. They basically do their due diligence. They handle all the complexities of the legal stuff. And so I came across lemon.io and I spoke to them, and none of the developers from there were good. Okay. But but I saw that there was potential in this idea of talking to these agencies who help you source developers, and maybe lemon.io did not have the best sourcing for talent, but that doesn't mean that thousands of other agencies out there don't have that sourcing that we expected, right? And so essentially what I did one day, and I still have a picture of my calendar on that day, was I basically looked up every single agency I could find on Google, booked meetings with them. And so I had a day in which I just bunked school and just I was on call after call after call after call after call after call, saying that, hey, this is our requirement and this is what we need, and I want a developer with this experience, blah blah blah. This is our tech stack, right? And so eventually we found someone, right? And so it was just a matter of knocking on a lot of doors, and of course hoping that one of them would of course click, right? And so someone from this agency called Scalable Path clicked, and that was our first hire, right? And so we had found our first engineer, and on top of that, I knew we can't just have one full-time engineer, we need a proper team. So we decided to announce our fundraise for our pre-seed round as well. And that got a lot of clicks on our careers page and our website. And so I had, 100 or so applicants for the position, and I basically screened every single one of them, and I found two more matches. And finally, I also run Build a Group, right? So I had an amazing source of young talent there, right? And so I put this position out there, people applied, and I found someone from there as well. And so we had this team. We finally had a team, right? And it was being we had someone with a lot of experience. We had a lot of young engineers who could ship with energy and ship quickly, and we also had people who could also collaborate with me as well on thinking about what the future features we would build out were, or like prioritizing bugs, etc. Right? And so we had a really good balance of people to make this happen. And so from that point in time, we were just heads down building. We were just, we said, hey, this is XYZ is our MVP. Let's build it out, right? And so then comes the problem of building an MVP, because in our case, we couldn't just build a really tiny 2 weeks hacky project and ship it out to people, because we are promising integrations with the tools that teams use, and we're promising a platform where people can collaborate across all these tools from one place. And so you can't just have a really, really, it's not like validating a super simple idea, right? It is something that needs extensive amounts of effort to actually validate, right? That the MVP was almost a maximum viable product because there was just so much to do, right? And so that was a stage where we had roughly 350K in the bank, and I had to build the team out and run the team in such a way that we had enough capital to keep building and building and building and building and building until we had our MVP. And so then comes in the story of estimating MVP launch dates, which turns out I'm really bad at. So the first date was supposed to be April, and that got pushed back to May, which then got pushed back to June, July, and finally we had it ready in August, right? So it turns out that engineers don't know how long building a feature will take, unfortunately, and that is something that I also have experienced, and I cannot blame the team for it. But it's also obviously really frustrating because we're saying it's almost ready. It's almost ready. We just need one more month. Oh, there are a few bugs here. We need one more month. And so of course, it creeps and creeps and creeps until, we finally had something we could actually ship, right? Which is an amazing feeling. And so then it was a matter of A, raising our next round because we had almost nothing in the bank left, and B, actually validating the product and shipping it to people, which is obviously way more important, right? And so that was kind of the story of building a team, and then extending that into building an actual product, and kind of just getting our engineers to collaborate and ship something, maybe not in the most timely way, but in kind of a reasonable timeline.
So, you got this thing where you're building product, right? And alongside building a product, you have to think about raising. And on the other side, you got to think about how to construct a company. Tell us about how you focus on managing the team, building a team, while alongside doing things like legal structure, accounting, who writes checks for finances. Is that something that you've just, got a guardian or a mentor that does that for you? Or is that something which you again had to learn along the way yourself? Tell us about that process. So because
Absolutely.
you're running to build a product, you're running, right? I gotta build a business before there's a business, right? But at the same time, I've got funding, I've got legal requirements, I've got safe agreements, I've got everything else. Come on. I mean, where did you do that other piece, actual company piece, not the product and the team? Tell us about that part. Are you leaning on someone? Are you outsourcing it?
So it's the most painful part of the process, because legals are A, extremely expensive, B, extremely time consuming, C, I'm a minor, so what do I do? Right? So so it was probably the most painful part, outside of, of course, just it was really painful. And so, the way I approached it, and I have my mother to thank for a lot of her help through this, but a big part of it was figuring out, how do we, okay, so we've incorporated a company, right? We had an agency help us out with that. I didn't want to spend 5 months incorporating a company and dealing with the fines and the timelines that they had, right? So we had incorporated a company. Now, how do we set up a bank account? Because creating an entity and having shares as a minor is not a problem, but having a bank account is the biggest pain, and I still deal with this pain. So I had to create the bank account in my mother's name, and so all the transactions are in her name, and also all the legal contracts for for agreements and stuff are also in my mother's name. So my mother is basically, she's running the entire legal side of the business as far as signatures are concerned. But of course, I have a lot of different platforms to thank. There's this platform called Deal we use for hiring. We also use, we use this platform called Inkle for a lot of the like the Delaware taxes and all that stuff is handled by them. Fortunately for us, so this is something that is of course progressed and become a lot better as with time, as people figure out online solutions for this stuff. But kind of in terms of actually kind of the safe agreements and stuff, we had a law firm write that up for us, and then I had to recirculate it with everyone, share it on DocuSign, sign it myself. They signed it, and so I have spent a fair amount of time on legal stuff as well, which I think is important, because even generally kind of you like outside of just being a founder, you probably kind of have to read a bunch of legal agreements for a lot of different things in life. And so, of course, I just thought of it as a learning experience for me personally as well, in terms of legal language and a lot of other stuff in documents. So it was a great learning experience, but also I have my parents to thank for it, and I also have these online tools that make this stuff a lot easier and remove a lot of the kind of the overhead from the process. So that was learning, but there's also a lot of help.
So, it's an experience, and kudos for you for doing all of this. I think all of this has happened within what, a 24-month period, effectively?
Yes.
Right. So we're talking about 24 months, right? And we'll get to some of your key people who you're using and leaning on from an experience point of view to make sure you don't make fundamental mistakes, right? Because again, you don't have that experience. This is your first rodeo, right? So you want to make sure, and your investors want to make sure you're protected and the business is protected and the long-term longevity of this business is protected, right? Because there's no instant success, right? It takes at least 5 to 7 years before you're an overnight success, and I've gone through this personally, so I can walk you through it. But you've got yourself with people. But before we get to that other people element, let's talk about the product itself very quickly, right? Today we've got Dimension 1.0. Now, in a very quick summary, right? Tell us today, if I was using Dimension, who am I? What does it do? Why am I using it? Just in a short summary.
Got it. Yes, absolutely. So you are an engineering team, like a member of an engineering team. You may be a developer, designer, or a product manager, right? And you are using Dimension, and Dimension has chat, code, cloud deployments, tasks, and everything else your team needs all in one place. And why using Dimension is because you want a better and faster way to build and deploy products that also doesn't require you to migrate your tooling to a different ecosystem. A really big problem that a lot of modern teams face when trying to move to these unified product development platforms is the fact that they have to migrate to a completely new ecosystem of tooling to realize the benefits, right? I can name drop, but there's for example, Microsoft Azure DevOps, right, which forces you to move to Azure's ecosystem, right? And fundamentally, that's not something that is a realistic option for a lot of modern teams, because they use their tools that they use today. Their tools work really well. They have their entire stack ready. Just for the benefits, the promised benefits of a unified platform, they are not going to spend hours and hours and take a substantial risk to just migrate to a different platform and hope that they get the benefits promised, right? So you can just connect the tools you use today into Dimension, and you can start building. There is no migration. There is no importing of data. You connect your tools, you connect GitHub, you connect Vercel, you connect Netlify, you connect Figma, you connect all the tools that you use like Jiva, Linear, etc. List goes on into Dimension, and then you can start using it, right? And so you are using Dimension today because you want a faster and better way to build products with the tools that you use today.
So can I just go to your website and use it today? Do I have to go onto a wait list? Is it ready to go? Is it out there? What's happening?
Sure. So as you can imagine, with building so many components into a single platform and building a lot of integrations, it takes a substantial amount of time to make sure that the product is stable, right? Because you have this integration that's breaking, they introduce a new change, this is gone, this is not working now. There's a lot of work in place to make sure that these components work really well together, which is why we're starting off with the private beta, where we can introduce smaller teams and graduate to larger teams as the product kind of gains more and more stability and reliability, until we are at we are larger teams who are using 10, 15 different integrations, and they're all working together, and they're able to use the platform every single day without significant challenge, right? It's easy to use the platform. They enjoy using the platform. They're actively using the platform. And that's when we would say, hey, we have an extensive enough set of integrations that we can go ahead and launch it to the public and say, hey, start building your product on Dimension. But right now we do have a wait list, and we are trying to onboard, the more than 5,000 developers on the wait list pretty quickly onto the platform as we see it becoming more and more stable.
Tejas, thank you so much. I think, the space is getting bigger. I don't think we're going to have less developers over the next 50 years or 10 years or 5 years. I think there's only more. And it's okay if other people come into this space. They're only educating more people on different things, and it keeps you honest and on your toes. But the only piece I can say is don't forget to be human once in a while. And congratulations and thanks for being on the show. And with that note, I'm handing you back, Ronit, to you, sir.
Tejas, you're in Dubai. You're going to stay in Dubai for the time being? No, normally at this stage in life, people are applying for universities and toying up whether, back to India, US, Europe, UK. And what are you going to do? You've got Gaurav and his friends' money now to build a company.
Yeah.
Are you going to pay for a dorm room in California? I don't know.
Yes. That's actually the plan. I'm actually this week I've actively been working on college applications as well, which has been a bit annoying to do alongside the company. I really wanted to focus fully, but I have to apply for university because I've been working towards this application for around 17 years of studying. So might as well give it my best shot if I'm doing it, and I've done it and I've been building up to it for so many years. So yes, I do plan to go to university. I am pretty certain I either want to be on the East Coast or West Coast. So definitely in San Francisco or California or somewhere in New York. So I want to be where there's a tech community where I can, of course, work with people, build cool stuff with people, find my next employees. Of course, just being in the scene. And yeah, so I'm applying to all the universities in kind of like that you can imagine in California, as well as in kind of like near New York and the Boston area as well. So that's kind of that's my plan, and my investors are already bugging me to move to San Francisco. But hopefully when I move to US, that unlocks a new kind of a new stage of my journey and new connections and new people.
Just as a kind of closing comment, just give us the highlights, the TLDR of that personal statement, or the trip to TechCrunch, trip to San Francisco. That's going to be our closing. Take it away, Tejas.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I went to San Francisco. I went for TechCrunch Disrupt, which is a startup conference in San Francisco, and there is this competition called Startup Battlefield 200, which I got selected for. It's basically they just select 200 companies from around the world to exhibit at TechCrunch Disrupt, which turned out to be a pretty selective thing. I didn't know that as I was applying. I was just it was actually the last day of the extended deadline in which I was applying. So I just hurried up. I didn't think much of it. I just did it. And then 4 months back, it comes back. You've been selected for Startup Battlefield. And I didn't even know what it was at that point in time. But then I realized, oh, it's this thing I applied for kind of a few months back. And so that was a bit of a surprise. But I went to San Francisco with my dad and of course PK as well, who is one of the members of Angel Spark. He's been really, really supportive of me. And I basically exhibited on like a tiny round table that they had in the conference. And so it was just pitching until my voice disappeared. And second day, this tall person walks up to me, and he has like a funky camera, and he says, "Hey, I saw you launched your private beta today. Congratulations! I really love your landing page. Can you tell me about your pitch, and like can you tell me about your company?" And he asked me if he could record that, and I said, "Yeah, sure, absolutely." And so I was pretty exhausted at that point in time because the second day I got like a few people on the wait list, but it wasn't like an astoundingly successful day in any shape or form. And it was getting pretty late in the evening, and my voice was disappearing for like the second time. So I did that pitch. I packed my bags, went back to the hotel and crashed. And I'm trying to sleep, but then my phone keeps pinging. And like what's the ruckus about? And then I noticed that I'm getting a lot of notifications from Twitter, and I mean I was already getting notifications because we launched our private beta, and that tweet received 200 or so likes. But I realized that that same person who took a recording of me pitching posted that on Twitter, saying, this 16-year-old has built Discord for developers from his bedroom. And so, that was crazy, because I like the like counter on that post just kept going up and up and up and up faster than I could even realize. And so, that basically ended up setting up, the next stage, or kind of our next round of capital, because some of the some of the best angel investors in the world reached out to me saying that, hey, I really like what you're doing. And some of them had an insane level of conviction before I even spoke to them. Like kind of the messages were, I would like to invest 300 to 500K in your company. And a few of the investors didn't even end up getting on calls, because they just, that validation publicly was just enough for them to invest. So we went viral, and that was the learning from the trip, is when you're in the Bay Area, amazing things can happen. When you're in San Francisco, amazing things can happen. And also to extend your luck surface area by just being there at the right place at the right time, right? Attending every conference you have, attending every meetup you're invited to, right? That's relevant. And so, that day, if I packed up my bags before that pitch, I mean, I would have just said it was a nice trip. But now, of course, that's completely changed everything for me in terms of dimension and our fundraise and the people supporting us at this point in time. So, my kind of like, I'm writing about kind of how just being there, and just giving everything, just giving every single pitch your all, can sometimes end up being absolutely insane in terms of the outcome.
Tejas, thank you so much for joining Gaurav and myself today. More importantly, keep building, keep pitching, and keep maximizing your luck surface area. And we look forward to watching your journey in the coming 3, 4, 5 years. It's going to be awesome, I'm sure. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much for having me on.
Thank you.